During World War II, Kazakhstan became home to thousands of Jewish refugees who endured a harrowing evacuation to escape the Holocaust.
I welcome you guys to our podcast, and I'm extremely excited, Anna, Daniel. I really am very excited about our conversation today because—
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
Especially because, when we first began exchanging, the messages over Twitter, etc., and we started our dialogue over the emails, it kind of brought back memories. I'm a conservatory graduate musicologist, and
Wow.
I studied from the Kazakh, from the books written by Kazakh Jewish people, right? And studied music by Kazakh national composer Brusilovsky, who is a Jewish guy, right? He is actually credited with the creation of the first, classical, meaning like classical to the Western world genres such as symphonies and ballet and operas, etc. Yerzakovich, for example, was someone who has written books on Kazakh music. He's a musicologist in Kazakhstan. If you look at his bio, he's one of the most prominent ones actually in music science, which was my major, by the way. And of course, Yerzakovich, who spent in the 1920s and 30s in Kazakhstan preserving, listen to this, preserving Kazakh folk music, as 2 books where he has in one over 1,000 of our songs and the other over 500. So yeah, it's just, we have a long history, the Kazakh people and Jewish people. And when I ran onto the article that was written about you guys and your project, I was so incredibly thrilled, and also I was so grateful. Thank you so much. The song Kazakhstan is just so wonderful and beautiful, and it's such a testament to what our nations have been through, in all the early of the 20th century. It's quite remarkable. Can you please talk about this project?
Sure. Thank you for asking about this. This whole Yiddish Glory project is based on archival research or ethnomusicological research, which was conducted during World War II by ethnomusicologist named Moisei Beregovsky. He was from Ukraine, from Kiev, and he worked at the Ukrainian Academy of Science. So during the war, he and his colleagues were evacuated to the Soviet rear. So he himself ended up in Bashkortostan, but other colleagues ended up in different places. During the war, he and his colleagues were recording music, both from Jews who stayed under the Nazi occupation in Europe, and also refugees who were in Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and of course, Kazakhstan. Now with Kazakhstan, the story is very complex because Jews who ended up there and refugees who ended up there came there for all sorts of reasons. The first Jews who ended up in Kazakhstan were actually prisoners, were refugees deported by Stalin's government from the territories of so-called Western Ukraine and Belarus. So this is the parts of Poland that were annexed by the Soviet Union in 1939. And some people who lived there, business, religious leaders, were considered to be anti-Soviet or potentially anti-Soviet. So they were arrested and sent to jails that were located in Kazakhstan. That's how some of the larger kind of initial Jewish population ended up there during the war, although there were Jews who lived in Kazakhstan before the war as well.
Oh, yeah.
Then some of the refugees who ran away from the German-occupied Poland, ended up in the Soviet Union, somehow ended on the trains to Kazakhstan. Finally, in 1941, people who were evacuated from Ukraine and parts of Lithuania and also from Belarus were sent to Kazakhstan just because there was a committee that distributed where all these where all the civilians had to go, and Kazakhstan was one of those destinations. We still don't know how many Jews actually ended up in Kazakhstan. The statistics for specifically Kazakhstan does not exist. But what we do know is between 15 and 17 million Soviet people ended up in the Soviet area during the war. Kazakhstan took a significant portion of those refugees. And of them, about 1.5 million were Jews, and also about 250,000 Polish Jews ended up in Central Asia. A large number in Kazakhstan, some in jails, some in just as evacuees. In 1941, most Jews who were in jail at that time in Kazakhstan were released and stayed there until the end of the war. The important part about this is, of course, that 250,000 Polish Jews who survived the war were the majority of Polish Jews who survived the war. So of 3.3 million Polish Jews, only about 300,000 survived the war, and 250,000 of them did so in the Soviet Union. And so I'm talking about this because Berezovsky and his colleagues spent the war in coming across people in evacuation. They called it all evacuations, an interesting term for describing those experiences, and were recording their music. Sometimes people who didn't have to record music did it anyway. They were kind of grassroots collectors. This is how we got the words, the lyrics of that song, Kazakhstan. The story goes like this. A person named Yakov Merzon was a teacher who lived in Ukraine in Kryvyi Rog. In 1932, he was arrested by Stalin for being a rabbi. And then he was sent to jail and was there until 1941. In 1941, he was released from jail because he was very sick. He lost all his teeth there. So he was begging on streets of Almaty. And then some kids were making fun of him because, he didn't have any teeth and he looked very scary. And they started throwing like rocks at him and stuff like this and teasing him. And he cursed them back in Hebrew. So parents of those children, children reported to parents. Parents wanted to see who's this teethless, scary man who curses in Hebrew on a street of Almaty. And they found out that this was Yakov Merzon, who was a teacher, but before that he was a rabbi too. And they hired him to teach those Polish Jewish kids a little bit of Hebrew alphabet. As he was doing this work for food, not for money, as he was doing this work, he kept a little notebook where he wrote down things he heard those children say. Sometimes jokes, sometimes little sayings, sometimes songs. In 1945, he heard that Moisei Berezovsky was collecting these materials. By that time, Berezovsky came back to Kiev, and he mailed him that notebook. In 1946, Merzon died. And that notebook is the only thing we have from his work in Almaty. These are handwritten songs that he recorded as he was working as a teacher. Because he was so terrified both of fascism, of course, but also of the Soviet regime that put him to jail, he didn't name a single person who sang a single song. They're all named anonymous because people lived there in fear that they could be arrested for anything. It's still Stalin's Soviet Union and all this. So, but thanks to him, we have this completely unique and really interesting grassroots music created by refugees in Kazakhstan. And this song, that Kazakhstan that you referred to, comes from that notebook. What's interesting about this is that it shows to us a number of things. First of all, is that these Polish refugees who end up there, they're absolutely fascinated by the place itself. They comment on mountains, they comment on nature, and they emphasize that this is not the place that we associate with Jewish culture. They've never been to Kazakhstan. Many of them have never even heard of Kazakhstan, don't know how to pronounce it, and yet this is the only place on earth where they're welcome. And that narrative of how, Jews thinking that they belong in Europe, in Germany, with high culture, with people with civilization that accepts them, the civilization that they helped to build, that all that rejected them. And Kazakhstan, which itself experiences poverty, experiences lack of, people who are there. A lot of men are drafted to the army, a lot of women too. They have nothing themselves. And yet they welcome the outcasts that no one else in Europe wants. And so the song comments on that. Of course, it's also Soviet propaganda that goes on at that time. There's no reason to kind of deny that its existence. Of course, it says that that people of all ethnicities are welcome there. But I want to say that in the context of what's going on in Europe, that, the song is created, it was written down on paper in 1945, but, Auschwitz is still standing and crematorium is still working in Poland, right? And so Jews from Budapest are being deported to Auschwitz in 1944. And to think of a place where Jews are welcome like everyone else, it's actually absolutely incredible. And sadly, not documented almost entirely in historical documents. Why not? Because after the war, a lot of those Polish Jews left Kazakhstan and ended up in places like Israel and Germany, some United States and some Canada, and then the Cold War started. So nobody was talking already about the role that the Soviet Union and, Central Asian and Asian countries played in rescuing Jews. So that story remained obscure. And our music brings it front and center. And it's also important that it's written in Yiddish, so the language that Jews speak in Europe and the language which they bring to Kazakhstan with them. And, the fact that many ethnic groups I mentioned there as brothers is also interesting. And sadly, some of those groups, like, it mentions Uyghurs, am I pronouncing
Yeah, the Uyghurs.
As being welcome there. And today we know what's happening with them in China, right? So already in that Yiddish song in 1945, it's talking about Uyghurs being welcome in Kazakhstan. Now, the thing about that particular song, I think what made it so appealing to you and to our listeners was its incredible tune. And the tune was not from the archive. The song the Merzon was not a musician. He only recorded the lyrics. But the lyrics are so powerful that we wanted to sing it as music. And the music for that song was written by Sergei Yordenko, who is a Roma performer from St. Petersburg. And, who arranged most of the pieces for Yiddish Glory. And this is the only song for which he wrote an original tune. So Sergei comes from a Roma dynasty of performers and musicians. And as you know, Roma too were persecuted during the Holocaust severely. And sadly, again, this is another obscure story, the story of which we hear very little and know. We hear more than what we know, but we know very little as well. So for Sergei, who was participating in this Yiddish project, which commemorated Holocaust in the Soviet Union, was important to bring a story of Roma in. And that song Kazakhstan gave him an opportunity to do so. Because he created this tune which brought together, Roman music and Yiddish music and kind of general internationalist spirit of Soviet music a little bit. And also to put the word Tsigayner, which in Yiddish means a Roma, into the song. So that's the only word that we added in the whole project. So I'm so glad that you're asking me about this, because in many ways that song represents the whole kind of tone and the whole message and the whole, spirit of Yiddish Glory, because we want to think about places where Jews were safe, where Jews managed to create life, as opposed to places where they were killed without being recognized as humans.
This is pretty incredible. I gotta tell you something. I would credit that. I don't even know. I mean, obviously, I mentioned you guys that my mom's mother, my grandma, actually during the World War II times, there was a winter when she saved a Jewish family herself, because I actually grew up in Almaty.
Oh, really?
Myself. I was born and I grew up there, but my heritage, my grandparents on both sides are actually from northern Kazakhstan, and that's practically southern Siberia. It's extremely cold, and a lot of those,
Tselenograd? Is that where?
Yeah, Tselenograd, that later became Astana, later became Nur Sultan. But this is even further north than that. This is where, like, the Baraboya lake is, Shchuchinsk lakes are. Yeah, and they had those, like, the camps for enemy of the states, and Stalin dumped people there, left and right, Jewish, later, whatever the Germans people that he could collect throughout the Soviet Union, he also threw into Kazakhstan, shipped them over like they are not humans. He did the same thing at a different time to Korean people, etc., etc. They all found home in Kazakhstan. And I must say that I probably would credit that to our fundamental spiritual belief that basically states, it's called Tengrism. It basically states that anyone under the blue sky are equal, anything and anyone. So we're all part of one thing. Yeah. And so I think that belief is what fundamentally, made our, culture so welcoming. In fact, the number one rule in Kazakh culture is hospitality. Guests are sacred. And so now we have still pretty big, especially given the fact that we're a small nation. The Kazakhstan people are, we're hardly even 18 million people there, but we still have a strong Jewish community that's thriving in Kazakhstan. And so Dan, what's your participation in the project?
So I actually saw this project actually started out as an academic project, and Anna Shternshis and singer Psoy Korolenko, the first time they presented it was at a conference. It was just piano and vocals with Anna giving these incredible stories about all the songs. And when I saw that, I approached Sergei Erdenko and Sophie Millman and a bunch of other musicians to do this properly and share these incredible songs with the world. And of course, Kazakhstan is one of the most moving pieces. And it's amazing to hear a piece written in the 1940s that so speaks to the world that we live in today, about the dangers of fascism, the dangers of bigotry, about multiculturalism. And it's so interesting when you got in touch with us, because one of the things we're working on right now is that this isn't the only song that was written in Central Asia. So many of the songs in the project were written in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and we're actually hoping to go there to explore this history and to give some shows there. And then, of course, 2020 happened. So hopefully that's going to happen in 2021 or whenever it's safe again to travel and borders open up.
We had tickets and everything. We were going to go with BBC journalists to do the story about and perform those songs in Kazakhstan. This was our idea. And we already had agreements with Philharmonia, there to do all that. And there's an incredible group of people actually in Kazakhstan who are working on stories of evacuation. The person who runs this thing, his name is Alexander Baron. And he is a descendant of people who survived the war in Kazakhstan, because a lot of them stayed there. And for years, like for 20 years, they're running these international conferences, researching, finding stuff in the archives, including the archives of president, of refugee life, and finding also stories of people like your grandmother who were able to host refugees very few of them shared what it was like for them to welcome people with them having nothing, living in starvation, living in deprivation, and yet welcoming people who slept often on their floors and stuff like that. So that story still remains to be written.
Yeah, the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, and 50s were extremely difficult for our nation. I'm talking about Kazakhs right now. It's not well known, but in 1920s and in particular 1930s, in some sources they say 50%, in some sources say up to 75% of Kazakh population died to starvation and direct killing by the Stalin regime. So I remember stories from my mom about all that really scary times. And I guess our people found somehow ways to survive together. But yeah, we at some point shortly after, I want to say 1950s, 60s, Kazakh population in Kazakhstan was a minority. Yeah. It was 39% of us. And of course, this kind of colonial past where we were forced to speak Russian language. Like, for example, you mentioned the beautiful city of Almaty, which used to be the capital of Kazakhstan. We only had one school in native tongue, right? When I was growing up, we were forced to speak Russian. We were forced to study Russian literature, Russian history, which nothing wrong with that, but everything that was national Kazakh was put aside, unimportant, no needed. We did have Kazakh language as one of the classes, but it was not taken seriously by anyone. As a result, we have one or two generations that don't even speak that native tongue at the moment. And obviously, the independence of Kazakhstan came as a huge celebration to our nation, and it's extremely important to every person who lives in Kazakhstan. And by the way, to just make one more reference, I think Kazakhstan's the only, and if I'm mistaken, then I'm so sorry about that, but I think it's the only country that has a temple of all religions in a current capital in Nur-Sultan. And it's a magnificent building, and everyone is welcome there. So somehow people live in peace. They have different faiths. They have different national ethnic backgrounds. And in many ways, I think my country is a good example that people can maybe learn from. Even like, Daniel just said, yes, I think it's important in current circumstances when some of the bigotry and racism issues of inequality are now have risen again, and we speak about it a lot more freely. But going back to this post-colonial identity crisis of our people right now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, obviously we have now been enjoying the independence as a country. And of course, I'm in the States, but I go back there frequently. I love my homeland with all of my heart, and my people too, all the people of Kazakhstan. And I do know how troublesome it is for them to restore the language, meaning the language is preserved, thank God, but to make sure that people actually speak the native tongue, to bring back the history of our nation, because it was rewritten back during Soviet Union. We were even stripped at some point in history books. We were stripped of our own name. We were called Kyrgyz Kazakh, for example, when we were the Kazakh nation, etc., etc. The native spiritual belief Tengrism that I mentioned was strictly forbidden. And so in the post-Soviet time, we were scrambling to bring it back all together and kind of rebuild our national identity. And in these circumstances, this project Borat, which kind of united the two of us and me. And in that regard, I'm actually grateful. But that one is extremely harmful to our people, because as a result of post-colonial past, not many people in the West know who we are. They don't know our history. They don't know neither recent history or old, ancient history, or even struggle to find our country on the map. And Sacha Baron Cohen actually explained the reason why he chose Kazakhstan for his project was exactly that, because we're not known, we are underrepresented, as I say all the time. And I think it's particularly painful to us because it's very, very damaging. And I don't know if he knew about that or not. I mean, I have no idea, but every single one of us, when we meet people who have not heard what Kazakhstan is, the only way for them to, the only association that they have was the word Kazakhstan is Borat. And so therefore we get a lot of, harassment. My kids, and when after the first movie, they were harassed at school, and so on and so forth. So vulgar jokes, I've gotten them so many times, and very cruel comments and things like that. And I know that I'm not the only one. Every single Kazakh person I spoke with report the same thing. I'm so sorry to bring this up in our conversation, but given the current circumstances, and you guys know that I've been, trying to bring awareness to this issue and how harmful and dangerous that is for our ethnic minority. I just want to know, what is your opinion on that?
So I haven't yet seen Borat, so I'm sorry about that. So I can't comment on the film, but generally, I agree with Sacha Baron Cohen's political stand against tyranny and all this, so it resonates with me. But I do want to say that erasure of native culture and First Nations is a huge problem. And, it happens everywhere. It happens in the States, it happens in Canada. And of course, as you said, it happens in Kazakhstan. And erasing people, people's culture and people's lives is never okay. I don't think Borat is the film.
Even ethnicity, like, look at us. We don't look white. We're
That's
not.
a whole new conversation, right? I don't think it was. I don't think that it's. Borat is the only film or the only cultural product that does damaging things like that. But I think also it became a little bit more acceptable, say, in the States to, it became less acceptable to make fun of groups of people that protested against it. And, and then but there's still this desire to kind of identify against someone else. And then they started looking for places like Kazakhstan that, as you say, are less known. And it's easy to forget that people live there, and it's a culture, and it's in a Jewish context, it's a land that saved a lot of people, including, it saved people from destruction. And for many historical reasons. And I think, my job as a historian, as an educator, to talk about that story. And, it's interesting how when you start looking for things, you find all sorts of, discoveries everywhere. Like, for example, this composer Weinberg, who is one of the most famous now Polish composers, he survived the war in Kazakhstan. You start looking into Yiddish theater or Yiddish culture in general. Some of the most important leaders and authors of Yiddish culture survived the war in Kazakhstan. So without Kazakhstan, there would have been almost no kind of post-Holocaust Jewish culture that relied on the pre-war materials, because it would have been completely different, right? So it would have been people who only survived the war, say, in Palestine or in the United States. But because Kazakhstan was there, we had some of this connection to the pre-war European route. And I think that's a story that needs to be told. And I think that's a story that needs to be told in a not moralizing way, because, nobody wants to hear that, but in a way that makes you feel that it's not just some random place far away, but it's actually a place where every Jewish family, at least Ashkenazi Jewish family, has a strong connection to. And I think that you're right to raise awareness of that. And I think it's really important to tell history in a way that gives voice to historical figures who never got to tell their story, and who, because of that, are now become symbols of something that they never were. So I think it is really important.
But it's very painful, like truly painful for me to watch that. It's just, I've been asked a question. I know that he had like some horrible dance there, like a women fertility dance, and his supposed daughter was doing some dance with, I don't even want to, comment on that. But the thing is like, I've been asked already if that is a Kazakh national tradition. And that's the most horrific, vulgar dance, where she picks up her dress, and she's just got her, blood streaming down her legs and stuff like that. I'm being asked if that is Kazakh national tradition.
Yeah.
Do you see like why? I really love how you put it on when you said, erasure. Yes, it is an erasure, because, now we have to deal with this horrible stereotype that, because no one knew about us, he actually was able to create the stereotype. And the guy is extremely talented, let's face it, and so, now each one of us have to constantly answer gazillion questions in the best case scenario, or get in fights in the worst one.
And you suddenly represent something that Sacha Baron Cohen ridiculed. You know what I mean? Like every single person.
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah. Which is so not true. And one of the reasons that why we guys are talking is the Kazakhs are definitely not anti-Semitic. It's the opposite of that. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, but I think it's something for everybody who's in the arts. If you have a TV show, a movie, or you're a popular recording artist, I think you have a responsibility to tell history correctly, because most people, whatever film that they watch, whatever album they listen to, whatever TV show they watch, most of them aren't going to go to a university class or read textbooks on what really happened at these places. So that's one thing, so at least we had hoped to. This project actually started as a way to preserve this history. When we started, we had no idea that it would get a following and it would get nominated for awards and people around the world would hear the songs. It was more just to pay tribute to the ethnomusicologists in Central Asia and Eastern Europe, Moshe Biographies and his colleagues, and of course the Holocaust victims and survivors who wrote these songs, and people in Central Asia who saved Jews during the Holocaust. The whole point of this was to tell their stories.
And I'd like to note, Borat is a humorous film, right? And it's interesting how our collection has tons of humorous songs. I don't know if you like if it's widely known, probably not. But there was a lot of we were surprised actually how much humor was there. They were ridiculing Hitler, they were ridiculing Nazism, and this whole kind of anti-fascist vibe is very much there. There are a lot of jokes about, Hitler's German army being incompetent, tons of them. And the spirit of that humor, by the way, is very physical, it's very gross. It's kind of like humor that, 8-year-olds enjoy. Pants fell down, ha, 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 pooing your pants in the middle of the day. Like that's the humor, all in Yiddish. And there was even a researcher named Herschel Blaustein who wrote in 1943 from Kazakhstan, he was in Almaty, saying that 1943 will be remembered as the year when Jewish humor flourished in Kazakhstan. you know? And there's an article about this, and he collected all these jokes, and I have all of them, that, you know, tells us what people found funny at that time. Of course, there were a lot of things they were not allowed to laugh about. So, for example, they're laughing a lot at Germans. They're really not laughing at all at Soviets. So nobody's laughing at like speculante or the market or the whatever stuff is there. Like, that's off limits. But, you know, the whole idea that this humor exists, that's really, you know, I think it deserves mentioning and deserves to be known, you know. So it's there is a true story to all the aspects of that history that's being portrayed in a stereotypical way.
Yeah, there's actually I remember a whole series of anecdotes coming, and when in Russian, anecdote means a short, funny story, right? Joke.
Yeah.
That comes from you know, the Ashkenazi Jewish people in Ukraine, Odessa,
Yeah.
to be exact. It's very, very famous. It's still very, very famous. And we had during Soviet time, we had a Jewish comedian, Arkady Raikin. I don't know if you guys knew. He was.
Well, I grew up in Moscow. You and I can speak.
Oh, you
Russian.
did? Okay, so so you know his humor. It was extremely famous. We listened to him all the time, and his son later too. But yeah, it's and I'm sure you know, even today, sometimes when I get a chance, I watch you know, humorous shows from Ukraine. And oftentimes the writers and the entertainers themselves are Jewish people.
Including Ukrainian Prime Minister.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, the Jewish humor travels very, very well, and still is very, very much alive.
Yeah.
So,
But it existed during the war. That's what I'm saying. Like, you know, it's that's a tribute to Kazakhstan, how, you know, that it was possible to laugh there, you know.
Well, with your project, let's talk about what's the next steps. I know that you guys want to travel, you mentioned, to Kazakhstan, and if I can help in any way, I'm there for you guys. And you know, like I said, I know a lot of ethnomusicologists there. If you guys need their help, maybe I can introduce you, etc.
That would be amazing. You know, we had tickets and everything. So yeah, and it got moved. So yeah, well,
so,
you want to talk about the future? Or?
Yes. So what is it that you guys have in mind for the project?
So okay, so here's the thing. The archive itself is vast, so it has hundreds of songs, and the goal is to, and most of the, you know, people who survived the war in Kazakhstan, they survived, but a lot of people who were under the German occupation were killed. And sometimes these songs are the only thing that's left of them. So what we're doing, and there were also soldiers in the Red Army who created songs in Yiddish. That story is also completely forgotten because the narrative went away from that. So our goal is to get 50 to 75, maybe to 100 songs from this archive, record them in a way that we recorded at Kazakhstan with musicians, and also on video with subtitles, and tell the story of each one of them. And then we're going to launch a website with all these materials there, with all these videos, with stories of the songs. In other words, our goal is to tell the history of Jews in the Soviet Union during World War II through music. That way, created by amateur singers, amateur composers, a lot of them children, and look into how they made sense of World War II through these songs that they wrote. So that's what's next. That's what we want next. What COVID will allow us to do next.
Yes.
That's a whole different story. And then we were hoping that, you know, by like if we ever come back to live performances and stuff, we already have a lot of invitations to go and perform. We're now doing it on Zoom, but you know, which in some ways is better, but because you don't have to get up from your chair, change it from your pajamas, you know, but you know, it's okay. So we're hoping to resume a little bit of concert programs, and the ultimate goal, of course, is to change the way that people understand the history of the Holocaust in the Soviet Union, And because I am a professor at the University of Toronto, I'm already beginning to change my curriculum thanks to Yiddish Glory. A lot of my colleagues are able to teach some of these materials, including Kazakhstan, which is, by the way, one of the most popular songs from the collection. A lot of people like to listen to that, but also a lot of my colleagues like to teach that because it has so many messages about what it's like was like for Jews in Kazakhstan that we simply cannot find in other sources, including memoirs. So the goal is to, to revise the way we understand that history and to give voice to people who never got heard and never got to tell their story in their own words. So that's a long-term plan, and who knows how much of it we'll be able to accomplish and what time and when.
I'm sure, well, in time you'll be able to accomplish that, and I think it's a very, very important work. And I am extremely grateful to both of you guys for pursuing it. There's not so many people who actually go this far for restoring the history of their nations, etc. And I think it's extremely important because when we paint the picture of one nation, as you have already proved, you also finishing up the touches of the history of another nation, and another, and that's how we, together, collaboratively, can maybe paint the full picture at some point. That is extremely, extremely important. Thank you guys so much.
It's also important, in today's world when people, I don't know, hate each other and kill each other for all sorts of superficial reasons. It's also important to look into the past and think of examples in history when there was peaceful coexistence. And even in this, space of deprivation and poverty, people found a way to support each other and help each other. I think that story inspires a better future, not just tells, a complete story of the past.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys again, and to be continued.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I hope that we can stay friends.
Yeah.
And keep in
Looking
touch.
forward to that.
And I hope that I can help you in any way possible, for sure, with your project. It's extremely important.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you so much for inviting us.